website hosting is not important. We have other things to spend our budget on. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch-up with me, your host, Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. So to start by myth busting this, your website hosting is probably one of the core things that you really need to pay attention to. So if you think about it, your website is, like we've discussed before, your shop window, your whole experience. It's where you're likely to be driving traffic to from social media, from email marketing, etc. So if you think about it, if your website went down, which that includes your email going down, your leads going down, potentially your CRM going down, can you imagine? That's essentially your whole business unless you have an offline shop. So your website hosting is really important to keep that going and to pay attention to what it's about and all the ins and outs and technical side of it. The other thing to cover off as a myth bust is your website hosting can actually impact your SEO, so your search engine optimization, how you rank on Google, how you're actually seen by Google and other search engines. Let's cover off vocab. So you'll hear people talking about your domain, which is your www. In my instance will be taelon.co.uk. That is likely that you pay for that or buy that and pay for it annually through software and service providers like GoDaddy. Then you have your server and your hosting. So again, you may do this through GoDaddy or you may use other websites like SiteGround. And this is where you're paying for your virtual rented land in the digital world. Then you think about SSL, so this is a security certificate, and there's a lot of countries that won't actually serve up websites unless you have a security certificate implemented on your website. So if you see a website domain URL and it has HTTP, that hasn't got a certificate. If it's got HTTPS, that's got a certificate. The other thing to think about is DNS, which is Domain Name System. So this is basically where you say, this is my URL, www.taelon.co.uk. This is my hosting space, that's my rented land. Can you make sure that these two are talking to each other? So if someone types in that URL, it goes to that website and that rented space. Okay, so I'm going to break website hosting down into 3 areas. And this is really to kind of understand the different sides of website hosting. Number 1, which is the basics. As always, this will depend on the type of business you are and where you are as a stage in your business. So are you e-commerce? Are you healthcare? Are you hospitality? Are you a small startup? Are you a massive conglomerate corporate? But one thing to bear in mind is the spend and budget for your website hosting. I would say, as a rule of thumb, always allocate at least 10% of your budget. As I already said in myth busting, your website hosting is the core that keeps your website up, which is where is your shop front for everyone to go to. So you don't want that going down. Another thing to think about in consideration of your basics is the location of your server. So this again may depend on the type of business you are. If you are in the healthcare space, it's likely that you need to have your records, so your medical records and all your client information, held in the same country that you are actually functioning as a business. There's also rules and regulations around this. So if you are within the GDPR compliance countries, your server should be within a GDPR compliant country as well. Your hosting as well of the geographical location is something you need to actually put in your privacy policy online and tell people where their data is being housed. It's all just a legal formality, but you need to be comfortable with knowing this information, and geographical location again may impact what hosting provider you go for, what your budget is. Do you have different locations as well that you need to consider? Another thing you might want to think about as part of your basics is, are you going to pay for a private hosting server or are you willing to have a shared space? So this can be shared with other businesses, with other startups. You wouldn't see their websites, but it's just what you're paying for. And obviously to have it more exclusive to you and to have it private, you pay more money. The other thing I would always suggest is opting in to pay for support with servers. So servers is not something that everyone typically is comfortable with or needs to have the time and expertise to do. So just pay for that expertise and support. When you're actually signing up for a hosting provider, you'll see typically bolt-ons to add on response time for support, but a normal hosting provider would probably respond to you if you raise a ticket within 4 hours or 24 hours, but be aware of that support time. And again, going back to what type of business you are, therefore what level of support you need. So if something happened to your website or your server and it went down, how much would that impact your business? If you have an e-commerce business, obviously that's vital. Whereas if you have a offline in-store shop, you may be okay with a 24-hour response time. Okay, the next thing, number 2, is if we're thinking about the more technical side of things or the more advanced aspects of it. So the one thing to think about, which I covered off in myth busting, is that SEO is actually impacted by your website hosting. So if you have a delayed response time, so you'll see, and again, I'll link all this in the show notes, there's a thing called Google Page Speed, where you can actually see what is your response time when it loads your website or loads certain pages of your website. This will be impacted by the hosting provider and the package that you have. If your website takes longer to load or longer to response, that scores you down in the eyes of Google. The other thing to think about is your uptime. So again, there is a tool which I will link in the notes called FreshPing, which you can use to see about when your website goes down. The tool is actually free, that you can sign up that if your website goes down, it will notify you of it going down, because not everyone is going onto their website all day long and checking it's alive. And again, with your hosting provider, you may have that they will notify you if anything happens to the server. But your uptime, again, is important from an SEO aspect and also from a customer aspect. Like, they don't want to know that your website goes down for hours on end and then they can't process an order because they probably won't come back, or they're submitting a lead and the website crashes. Again, how will they know when to go back? So you want to aim for a 99.999% uptime, but no one's going to guarantee 100% uptime. But if your uptime, and that is literally how often your website is up or how long your website is up, is under 80%, you've got fundamental problems. So this is something that you need to be, again, aware of. The other thing to think about is scalability. So if you're building as a business, or if you have busy periods and times, so for example, there was a client we used to have when I worked at an agency before that would have certain periods of time that they knew they were going to have an influx of applications. Okay, so imagine you know that you're going to do a Black Friday sale and you're going to have an influx of people coming to your website to buy things because you're going to do a 50% off sale or whatever it is. You may want to extend the space of your website on your server. So basically your website has the capacity to take on more visitors. This is not something you really need to think about in your day-to-day. This is, again, goes back to the size of your business and your type of your business, but it's how much can you scale up? How much can you add on to have more traffic? Because when you're doing your server hosting, it'll tell you what the capacity of your website that you can have. So obviously the more content you add, the more space you need, and it'll give you an estimate of, like, if you have a website this size with this much traffic, this is how much space you might need. So again, you don't need to know those technical side. The server hosting provider should be able to tell you that information. But scaling is important as a more advanced, I suppose, feature, depending on your business. And then number 3 really is around maintenance. So you should regularly review, at least annually, when your annual renewal is up, your hosting provider, your speed, your service, remembering throughout the year, or you might want to make some notes about things that happen throughout the year and review where you are and change hosting provider if you need to. This is something that you shouldn't just let roll on and just leave it and one and done it. This is something that, as I said, is the core foundation for keeping your website alive. So just remember, if your hosting goes down and your website goes down, what do you have? So every year when you have your annual renewal, firstly, make sure it's an automatic renewal so you don't let it lapse, or put a reminder in your diary to review it a month before, because if you want to do a changeover of hosting provider and server provider, again, you need that crossover period between the two hosting services. So you need that ability to give yourself the breathing space in case anything happens. The other thing to think about with maintaining your website is backups. And again, comes down to size of your business, how much traffic you have, how much content you have on your website. If you have a couple of pages on your website, and I'm talking like 3 to 5, you may not be bothered about backups because you may think, well, I've got all that content saved in Google Drive and, you know, to Word documents, I could just get it live again. But if you've paid a lot of money for your website, or it's a bit more technical, or you don't want to rewrite it and redo it, then you need to implement backups, so daily backups or weekly backups or whatever. But again, this all comes down to actually maintaining that side of your website. And this isn't just a website backup of your content. This is like the whole website, right? Which you should have a backup on your server. Again, we can go into a lot more detail if we're talking about like website maintenance, about ways of working and having a staging, etc. But this is just to bear in mind of things to consider and things you may ask about when you're going through your website hosting. So hopefully that's covered off enough information to give you talking points in the conversation for your website hosting, and also to confirm to you that please pay attention to your website hosting, because it is important and there should be some budget put behind it if you have a website. And in the grand scheme of things, of thinking about your business, that percentage allocation, at least allocate 10% to your website hosting, because if it goes down, you don't have anything. But thank you for joining me for another episode of Engage and Thrive, and see you next week.